Hi, everyone. Today we're going to talk about chapter 9 of our book. And at the end of chapter 8, Ron was convicted of 2 rapes now. And we learn it on page 143 from Roger Blackstock when he goes back to prison. Roger's like, "Man, I can't believe you go for a new trial and come back with more time than you left." So he was convicted of 2 counts of first-degree burglary, first-degree rape, first-degree sexual offense, second-degree rape, and second-degree sexual offense, and sentenced to 2 life sentences plus 54 years. And the judge agreed that the both life sentences could go at the same time, could be considered at the same time. Either way, it doesn't matter. He's still going to spend the rest of his life in prison. Um, and so he's got to find a way to deal with that time, to make it feel so that the time isn't doing him. He's doing his time. He had to make peace. He says in the middle of page 144, "I had to protect my mind to get in front of the time. The first 4 years of Central Prison had been pure survival, a constant fight against the reality of my situation. Now it was time for me to make peace with the fact that I might not ever get out." And his case ends up going to the North Carolina Appellate Defender's Office, so there's a new attorney working on his appeal. So when he's back at Central, Bobby Poole and Kenny, they're gone. He's back in the kitchen working, but he wants to make a little bit more money, so he's drawing pictures for people to send in their letters home to family. And then he's got 2 new inmates sleeping with him, David and Randy, and they want to earn some money by making something called buck, which is homemade wine. But they need some supplies from the kitchen, and that's why they ask Ronald if he will help. And so what they need is yeast, sugar, and anything I could find to flavor the wine, potatoes, tomato paste, grapes, orange juice, or rice. And then Ronald, on his own, would take these big bags that the milk came in, and after they were cleaned out, he would bring those back to make the wine in. And so they'd have to mix it all up there and keep it in the bags for several days to ferment and make the wine come. And so that can be a smelly thing to do. They use Bengay to kind of help cover up the smell from guards. And then, of course, they had to test it, make sure it was a good batch. And when they did have a good batch, we bought coffee cups at the canteen and opened for business. A cup was $1 and a pitcher. An empty hot water bottle, if you had one, went for $3. And he does mention that later on down the road, he does hear that David, his roommate, ends up getting shot while he was trying to escape from another prison. With the money he earned from the wine, he started his own canteen where he was selling different things to other inmates and making a profit from that. Earned a reputation for wheeling and dealing in prison. He was still singing with the choir. Singing was freedom for him. But not for long, because he gets sent to Caledonia, where Bobby Poole is actually at, and he gets a job in the cannery. For this chapter, up on Cobra in the folder for this chapter, I have got a link to a video by John Oliver, and it's talking specifically about prison labor. Believe it or not, in our 13th Amendment, we can basically use slavery as a punishment for prisoners. There is a great documentary on Netflix called 13th, and it's specifically about that. So if you have Netflix, take some time to check that out. But in this video, they are going to talk about some of the different jobs that inmates have and how very little, and I mean cents, like 9 cents, is what they earn for doing those jobs. One of them is actually being a firefighter out in California. Some of the homes have been saved by prisoners because they have been firefighters out there. But the video goes on to talk about how corporations are really taking advantage of prison labor. So people complain in America how jobs are leaving America and they're going to China. The reason why is because corporations can pay people in China to do the work for a lot less than what you would pay Americans here. And so the same goes with prisoners. There's a lot of major corporations that you would know where they have their product made by prison labor because it's so much cheaper. They don't have to pay minimum wage or anything like that. Also, companies are taking advantage of services that inmates get, like video calls. the pricing of those is skyrocketing, and some companies are trying to get rid of face-to-face visits in prison so they can do these video calls so that they can charge so much more. Now, wardens and guards will say, "Oh, well, we're getting rid of the visitation, face-to-face visitation, because it'll help on contraband." Well, here's the thing: a lot of contraband come in because of the guards. So, the idea that we're getting rid of this, to lower it on the contraband, that doesn't really work out. So definitely take a look at that video. It's very interesting. It also talks about how female inmates have to pay for their sanitary products, and how they're only given 12 pads a month. And if you're a woman and you know that that's probably not always enough, they literally have to pay a month's worth of wages just to go to a doctor to convince that doctor that they need more. And that's a gamble. They might not give it to you then, and you've just wasted your month's worth of income. And so there's a lot of problems with the prison labor system. And so seeing how Ron worked in the kitchen and now he's working in a cannery, that'll address some of those. So there was no choir, unfortunately, at this prison. So he ends up working out more, and that's when Bobby sees him. He writes a letter to his new attorney saying, his family's too far away now for visits. He thinks it's very dangerous for him in prison with Bobby. He would like to try to get moved. He talks about the difference between an open dormitory and a closed custody. Closed custody is where it's just a cell with you and your roommate, whereas open dormitory is like a huge gymnasium filled with bunk beds and different people. And again, you can't show that you're weak. Even if you fight and you lose, you're still showing you've earned your respect in there. And so he's got a new guy who's on his case named Donnie, who keeps trying to fight him. Ron talks about a guy named Ricky that he meets in the cannery. Ricky is in there for the same thing that he's in there for. This is on page 152. It's interesting, a few things he says here. It was hard to believe anything anyone said. A lot of people in prison say they're innocent. Others lie about their charges. Most people, for security reasons, say they're in for murder. It makes them seem badass, I guess. Some of the nicest people you meet in prison were sometimes the ones who had done the worst stuff. Some people told lies because they didn't want to accept what they had done. And sometimes, if you were a child molester, you didn't want people to find out about that because even murderers would come after you. Ricky was always in trouble. He was always borrowing money and never paying it back. So he was always having to defend himself. And Ron helped him out by getting him he found a wrench and he gave it to Ricky. Ricky got caught with it, and he told the guards that Ron was the one who gave it to him. So Ron got 6 days in the hole. And he says, I tried to look at it as a room to go into rest. It was a break from the population where I could catch up on correspondence without always having to look over my shoulder. Ricky ends up getting transferred to another prison, and we find out later that he hung himself. It was hard for his family to visit, and then we find out what happened to his sister Diana. She started dating a guy who she finds out later was selling drugs, so she takes him to a motel where she thinks it'll be safe to break up with him, and it's not. He pulls a gun and he shoots himself. And then the police tried to say Diane did it until they checked her hands for gunpowder and realized there was no way she could have been holding the gun. Someone told her, you might as well leave town because they got it in for the Cottons. And so here, she's already got a brother who's in prison. The police are just assuming that she's the one who did it as well. And that's horrible to think. And then the guy Donnie is after Ron again. But it's broken up by the COs. Someone plants a shank in Ron's shoes, and so he goes back into closed custody. He says, in the end, staying in closed custody is in a cell instead of exposed in the open dorms probably kept me alive. Then we find out at the bottom of page 156, his attorney screwed him up on his appeal. I later learned that he had not raised the best argument available to me, that the judge had committed something called reversible error by keeping the pool evidence from the jury. And so this can go either way, where in this case in Ron's, they kept this information from the jury, so the jury didn't get to hear it. Or there's other cases where they allow juries to hear stuff that they shouldn't have because it could be too prejudicial for them. Because if they heard that, they would just automatically think that that person is guilty when you have to leave that kind of evidence out. He gets a new attorney, Malcolm Hunter, and Hunter's like, hey, we're not giving up yet. There's still stuff we can do. And then Ron gets a kitty named Judy. And his bunk is on the first floor, so it's easy for her to come and go. But then he has to be moved to the second floor, and they won't let him take Judy. So he ends up opening his window, using a blanket, and she jumps up on that. We learned that in 1991 his conviction is upheld by the Supreme Court of North Carolina, and then he is going to be moved again to a correctional facility in Troy. And right before he leaves, Judy disappears for good. Unfortunately, there is a rumor that there are inmates who are abusing animals there at the prison. The FBI uses certain predictors that say if these things happen, more than likely that person could become a murderer, a killer, and animal cruelty is one of those. So is arson, bedwetting, and there used to be a short list, and now there's like 100 things on a list. And then we learned that his sister Diana still is not well. She's on disability because of what happened to her ex-boyfriend. She's living with his mom. But at Troy, you can have more personal contact with your family members when they come visit. You can hug them and take pictures and things like that. He tells his dad, the lawyer Hunter, he says it's not over yet, but I don't know. I'm getting tired. Sometimes I think it would be easier to just let go and accept my situation. His dad said, Poole's got to confess one of these days. What man would want that mark on his soul? But Ron says he didn't seem to mind lying in court. And already we know that he can't take his case to the federal court, where that's the federal Supreme Court of the entire country, where Ruth Bader Ginsburg is. So we're waiting for this other door for the appeal to open. So that is chapter 9. Don't forget, go and watch that John Oliver video about prison labor and how companies are making a lot of money off of prisoners. If you have any questions, please let me know, and then we'll get started on our next video for chapter 10.